When Vince McMahon exits this mortal coil, which will likely come after all of us and our grandkids have all died, he will do so with a very curious legacy. His detractors will continue to ridicule him for destroying professional wrestling, a callous and devious carny of the highest order. But the fairer-minded, I think, will note that behind Vince McMahon's vision, pro wrestling became something that few others could have imagined it as. A global spanning empire combining sports with entertainment to create I don't know if there's a word for it. But there will forever be a divide in the perception of Vincent Kennedy McMahon. However, there will be near unanimous agreement, however grudging, on at least one aspect of his impact. Nobody, absolutely nobody, has taken wrestling to the heights that Vinnie Mac has. I'm Jack from Cultaholic.com, and this is the captivating career of Vince McMahon. For the first decade plus of his life, Vince didn't know his father, esteemed promoter Vincent J. McMahon. Instead, he grew up with his mother and a revolving door of stepfathers, not meeting his real dad until the younger Vince was 12 years old. He became interested in the wrestling business from watching his father promote the New York territory, and wanted to become a wrestler himself. But Vincent J. attempted to dissuade his son's dream, believing that those on the promotional side of things need to remain out of the spotlight. Despite attending military school, graduating from college, and working for a time as a traveling salesman, the wrestling bug still clung to Vince Jr. By the late 60s, Vince Sr. relented, allowing his son opportunities to help with the territory. He began as a ring announcer and also tried his hand at promoting when his father assigned him a small part of the operation in the northeastern state of Maine. In '71, after longtime WWF announcer Ray Morgan was let go by Vince's father after a pay dispute, his son stepped in to handle broadcast duties on short notice. Initially just a fill-in, the headset would soon be donned by McMahon as one of the company's lead announcers for the next quarter century or so. But not content with just being an on-air personality, Vince worked fervently behind the scenes throughout the 70s to boost the viability of the WWF. This included widely expanding the company's syndicated TV presence, tripling the markets that the shows were available in. He also promoted the rather infamous boxer versus wrestling match that pitted Muhammad Ali against Antonio Inoki. In early 1980, Vince and wife Linda founded Titan Sports, a company based in the state of Massachusetts. While Vince still remained an integral force in his father's company both on and off camera, it was becoming clear that he had designs on superseding the very idea of territorial wrestling. In the spring of '82, McMahon, now knowing that his father was looking to sell his interests in what was now the World Wrestling Federation, stepped in and bought up the shares, also buying out Gorilla Monsoon, Arnold Scarland, and longtime company treasurer Phil Zacco. He agreed to pay about $1 million in all over about a year's time, with the knowledge that if he were to default, his shares would be forfeited back to the prior owners. In other words, McMahon's WWE venture needed to work, and work fast. As Vince's syndication crossed over into the territories of his fellow promoters, he pulled the WWF out of the National Wrestling Alliance in August 1983 as he set his sights on McManifest destiny. Just days after splitting from the NWA, McMahon pushed into cable television via Sunday morning placement on the USA Network with a show called All American Wrestling. To further strengthen the product, he began poaching the best and brightest from the territories he was no longer affiliated with, including Roddy Piper, Paul Orndorff, David Schultz, and Dick Murdoch, while also taking exclusive control of Andre the Giant's bookings apart from his Japanese excursions. But the real grand prize was the charismatic and muscular Hulk Hogan, whom Vince put his world title on within a month of bringing him back to New York. Bob Orton, Junkyard Dog, Gene Okerlund, the US Express, Greg Valentine, Kamala, Brutus Beefcake, Bobby the Brain Heenan. Suddenly, McMahon's WWF was summoning mercenaries from around the circuit, depleting the opposition as he drove his figurative tanks across their boundaries. He even gained the TV outlets, most notably through the acquisition of the Georgia wrestling stock owned by Jim Barnett and the Briscoe brothers, leading to the infamous Black Saturday fiasco. It was one that sent Southern wrestling fans into a frenzy, and Vince also made a key celebrity link-up when Cyndi Lauper got into a physical altercation with Captain Lou Albano, kicking off the transcendent rock and wrestling era. And it was this that really thrust McMahon's WWF into the mainstream. Rock and wrestling begat WrestleMania, a major financial gamble on the part of Vince, who faced certain ruin should it have proven to be a bomb. But WrestleMania, through both its wrestling and its celebrity iconography striking a chord with America's youth, proved to be a monumental success. With Hogan as his centerpiece, Vince continued to reap the benefits of his winning sports entertainment formula. Saturday night's main event followed, allowing for periodical late-night placements during SNL's off weeks, while the USA Network commissioned further WWF selections like the irreverent Tuesday Night Titans and the more straightforward primetime wrestling. All the while, in the days before wrestling news and tidbits were readily available for consumption, Emperor McMahon was merely an enthusiastic voice on a headset in the eyes of most of the viewing public. The wave of Hulkamania continued to carry Vince and his big ideas through the late 80s, even after rock and wrestling had faded a little bit as a fad. The success of WrestleMania 3 and subsequent expansion of the pay-per-view calendar felt in tune with the big this, big that, big everything sentiment of 1980s culture, as McMahon became more and more hell-bent on crushing his remaining competitors. The invention of Survivor Series and the Royal Rumble were kind of brutish swipes across the nose of Jim Crockett Promotions, and the single-file march of wrestling's most gifted stars into the company continued unabated, from Randy Savage to Jake Roberts to Ted DiBiase to Curt Hennig and other colourful performers of all shapes and styles. But the bottom soon fell out. In '89, a year when WrestleMania 5 set a record for wrestling pay-per-view buys that stood for a full decade, and in which McMahon tried his hand at Hollywood, scandal fixed to pounce. Pennsylvania-based Dr. George Zahorian, a longtime attendee of WWF events in the state, found himself in the crosshairs of federal investigation. In early 1990, Zahorian was indicted on 15 counts of distributing controlled substances, and was then convicted in the summer of '91, and McMahon's company was intertwined with his dealings. The ugly news, along with the PR disaster that was Hulk Hogan's appearance on Arsenio Hall, struck WWF with devastating blows that served to expedite the company's decline from its peak. While the empire whittled and burned, and his own federal indictment loomed, McMahon put forth early attempts at a persona that wouldn't find prominence for several more years, himself as a heel. During a WWF-USWA interpromotional war of sorts, McMahon sent in taped promos in which he menaced Jerry Lawler, while dispatching his roster to Memphis in order to try and overthrow the king. Come July '94, McMahon's trial for steroid distribution began, which resulted in the WWF chairman being found not guilty. Though he was spared conviction, McMahon had his work cut out for him trying to rebuild his tattered promotion, which had lost, among other household names, Hulk Hogan, and would soon lose Randy Savage as well. The following year, WCW began Monday Nitro, a direct rival to Vince's Monday Night Raw, which had occupied the night since the dawn of '93. With Raw and its depleted roster playing to diminished crowds, Nitro felt fresher and more cutting edge. And after Razor Ramon and Diesel left to fortify the ranks of WCW in the spring of '96, Raw found itself getting lapped by the competition. McMahon needed to upgrade his own product, and a redesign of Raw came in '97. Vince himself even got physically involved on screen when rising star Stone Cold Steve Austin dropped him with an emphatic stunner on a September '97 episode of the program. His next bit of physical involvement actually proved to be much more genuine at the hands of an irate Bret the Hitman Hart. McMahon conspired with others to forcibly depose the outgoing Bret of his WWF title at the '97 Survivor Series in Montreal, and McMahon is said to have been KO'd backstage by Bret for his treachery. He went on to defend his actions in a sit-down interview with Jim Ross, believing he would be seen as having done the right thing for his company. Instead, Vince was vilified by and large, especially when he said Bret screwed Bret, which would later be used to his advantage when Austin ascended to the world title and needed an arch-nemesis heel that could help him create compelling television. Blue-collar Austin versus iron-fisted McMahon was the turning point WWF was looking for, its foundation bearing the weight of the mesmerizing blend of Crash TV known as the Attitude Era. An Austin challenge to McMahon on April 13th, 1998 gave Raw its first ratings win over Nitro in 22 months, and the company continued to mine from that well going forward. McMahon conspired to end Austin's reign at every turn, mixing his natural villainy with genuine performer's chops, and a comic timing that few others in wrestling have really ever possessed. From his time as the ultimate evil boss came the corporation, as well as forays into the ring, where against all odds he won the '99 Royal Rumble match and was even WWF champion for 6 nights. Austin wasn't the only wrestler to cross the boss, as Vince made enemies of quite a few others. Other noted rivalries came against, for example, Mankind after double-crossing him, Triple H when the Game menaced his wife Linda, The Rock after he screwed him over at WrestleMania 2000, The Undertaker upon the Dead Man's return, and even his own son Shane after Vince drove Linda into a catatonic stupor. Amid all these venomous grudges, McMahon found time to start up and close down a football league that quickly did become the laughingstock of every late-night host on the air. But don't worry, Vince learned his lesson from the money-losing XFL in 2001 and did vow never again, and I'm sure that'll be that'll be absolutely fine. Amid all of this McMahon excess, WWF as a company went public, and a new wrestling boom was kicked into a higher gear, and also Vince achieved his ultimate goal of bringing WCW to its knees. In March 2001, McMahon bought the assets and selected contracts of an enemy in tatters, bringing an end to the Monday Night Wars and standing alone on the battlefield. An attempt to create artificial competition through a highly clamoured for invasion angle, complete with heavy McMahon involvement, did end up to be a critical failure, unable to capture fan imagination the way that most had hoped it would. Vince attempted to make up for this disappointment by dropping his pants on television over the course of several weeks, but even that did get a bit old quickly. After battling with sudden new co-owner Ric Flair over business decisions, the two each took one of the company's main TV shows in the first ever WWF, or soon to be WWE thanks to a panda attack, brand extension. Vince controlled SmackDown for a few months before beating Flair in a hasty winner-takes-all match on Raw in June 2002 to gain 100% ownership. He eventually assigned daughter Stephanie and Eric Bischoff to the GM positions and proceeded to go away for a little while. But in early 2003, Vince rained on the parade of Hulk Hogan, vowing to kill Hulkamania, apparently bitter about Hogan testifying at his '94 trial. Hogan vanquished Vince at WrestleMania 19, the match that gave us the awesome visual of Vince's floating head of death. Look at that. Vince proved quite active as a wrestler in 2003, competing in 3 more pay-per-view bouts. At Vengeance that July, McMahon had an oddly compelling bout with one-legged Zach Gowen, narrowly defeating the brave youngster. 3 months later, in a pretty needless and quite disturbing match, Vince choked out daughter Stephanie in an I Quit match at No Mercy. He capped off the run with a Buried Alive match against The Undertaker at Survivor Series, in which he performed one of the most alarming blade jobs in history, losing enough of his own blood to fill the bloody English Channel. And yet, Vince still won thanks to some well-timed homicide on the part of an intervening Kane. It's not like he didn't have previous. From there, McMahon's appearances became much more sporadic, remaining off-screen for the sheer majority of 2004 and 2005. Periodically, he'd pop up, whether it was graciously thanking the fans at WrestleMania 20 or removing cumbersome objects from Jim Ross's ass on an episode of Raw. By the time 2006 rolled around though, insidious Vince was back, targeting Shawn Michaels for daring to brush off Vince's attempt at a mockery of Bret Hart. This led to the two facing off at WrestleMania 22 in a very one-sided match, perhaps though the greatest squash match of all time, as Michaels beat Vince into a bloody pulp. The year 2006 was one of rekindling what had worked before. DX was back, as was Saturday night's main event, ECW, and of course, an evil McMahon running the show. Flanked by Shane, Vince waged war on D-Generation X, only to find himself humiliated at every turn by the pair's infantile antics. He and Shane lost consecutive pay-per-view bouts to DX at SummerSlam and Unforgiven, the latter of which was a Hell in a Cell handicap match where the McMahons had Big Show as a partner. Ultimately, that didn't work out for the best. Soon after, Vince ran afoul of a future US president, wagering his hair against that of Donald Trump at the blockbuster WrestleMania 23, and had his own hair shaven off after his fighter Umaga lost to Trump's fighter Bobby Lashley. Now bald and dressing like a Dick Tracy villain, McMahon gained revenge on Lashley by winning the ECW Championship from him. After dropping the belt back to Lashley, Vince went truly off the deep end, and when an appreciation night held in his honor didn't go so well, he faked his own death via the old exploding limousine gag. We all love it. He miraculously came back to life weeks later after grim real-life events left him truly no alternative, and settled for a storyline instead in which he was revealed to be the father of Hornswoggle. From there, Vince kind of dipped in and out of storylines on a whim, sometimes a babyface like when he aided Triple H against Legacy, and other times as a heel, looking ridiculous, for example, in the presence of various guest hosts. At the age of 64, Vince had one last match left in him when he entered into a kayfabe rivalry with former estranged star Bret Hart. At WrestleMania 26 in Glendale, Arizona, Vince and Hart had what could generously be termed a slow-motion version of the Vince vs. Shawn match, but it was kind of understandable. And fittingly, I suppose, the wrestling version of Mr. McMahon succumbed to Bret Hart, the very man against whom heel Vince was born more than a dozen years earlier. We'd still get glimpses of the evil boss from time to time, most notably trying to strike down CM Punk when the belligerent one made scathing remarks about the state of the company in June 2011, and later he became the driving force behind the Authority. There he backed daughter Stephanie and son-in-law Triple H in their dictatorship over the company, although he did so slightly from afar. Roman Reigns became one of the latest stars to match evil Vince in late 2015 as McMahon attempted to stack the deck against the big dog in his world title bid against Sheamus, only to fail, later providing a mugshot that nightmares are made of. In 2016, Vince was surprised by the return of his son Shane, who'd spent 6 years away chasing opportunities elsewhere. This gave us the infamous Lockbox storyline. What was in that Lockbox? A storyline that really made about as much sense as any Peter Gabriel music video. After which, Vince let the kid he hated so much run the show anyway for giving it a good go against The Undertaker. McMahon's last physical storylines included him getting headbutted bloody by Kevin Owens and taking one more stunner at age 72 from Stone Cold Steve Austin, part of a widely viewed segment that kicked off Raw's 25th anniversary. They were ratings together 20 years ago, and at the onset of 2018, they were ratings again. As of this video, we're learning that the more things change, the more things kind of stay the same. Vince is about to do battle with a rival promotion that has TV clearance on Turner Broadcasting, and is also starting up an alternative football league that begins play after the Super Bowl ends. At the age of 74, 50 plus years into his time in the business, the ever-enduring Vince shows little to no signs of slowing down. Love him or hate him, no industrial figure has ever had the lasting power and resilience of Vincent Kennedy McMahon, the man that fundamentally shaped the wrestling we watch today and will continue to watch throughout our lives. Thanks very much for watching, and let us know what you think in the comments section down below. You can follow Cultaholic on Twitter at Cultaholic and on Facebook at facebook.com/Cultaholic. If you enjoy what we do, then please do check out our Patreon, patreon.com/Cultaholic, where you can pledge. And don't forget, of course, most importantly of all, to hit subscribe and to join us.